Hi, everyone, and welcome to a live app teardown. I'm Ariel, co-founder and CEO of Appfigures and chief ASO analyst, and I'll be walking you today through my process of App Store optimization, understanding what apps do, trying to understand why they do it, and then applying a set of ideas and thoughts and tips and tricks to improving it. We have asked everyone in attendance to submit an app, and many of you have. It's always very difficult to select which apps to actually do this for, and I can only do 2 at a time. I tried 3 in the past. That didn't work out all that well. It's hard to actually do it right in an hour. So I picked 2 at random. They're pretty cool. I picked a game on Google Play, and I picked an app on the iOS App Store, and I think they're going to be very interesting. There's a lot to share about them. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through my process. I have a few slides that I'm going to show you. And then after that, we're going to drop into the tools, and we're just going to do it in real time. All of this happens in real time. I didn't do this before. I didn't save any of this. So everything I'm finding in front of you, which is where all the fun is, in my opinion. If you have any questions about anything I'm doing, anything I'm mentioning, please drop them in the questions tab, and I'll try to answer them as I go through or at the end, depends on how they fit. And if you would like to tell me more about who you are, I posted a poll in the polls tab. So please take a look at that and share with me. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen again. So what's an app teardown? If you are not following my newsletter, my Tuesday newsletter, today's newsletter, an app teardown is what my process is like for looking at an app and assessing what it's doing with its App Store optimization. I go through the keywords that it's using, the keywords that its competitors are using, and I look at the entire industry around it to see who it's competing with, what they're doing better or worse. And then I look at the page itself for the app. So I can take a look and say, what can we do better to improve conversion? So we can get people to the App Store page or Google Play, and then we can get those people to also download. And why do I do this? I almost spilled my tea. I do this because I believe that hands-on learning is the best way to learn. Even though I write a lot of guides, which I will link to at the end, the one thing that I find for myself and also the people, some of the developers that I speak with, most useful is to do it in real time and see what it's like, and see what it's like for apps that you may have downloaded already, you may have seen, you probably have seen, and understanding whether they do a good job or a bad job and why. To me, that ties it all together, and hopefully for you too. So the thing about ASO is, and if you've talked to me ever before, you know that I think it's as much art as it is science. There's a lot of data that we can use to understand what to do, but how to do it is always a bit of a challenge because it's not like programming, meaning it's not sequential. There isn't a set of rules to follow, and you know for sure that it's going to work. There's a set of rules to follow, but you think they're going to work. So the way of doing this is if you know the numbers and you have the data and you have the science part down, the art part becomes very iterative to get it done right. And I believe in experimentation. I believe the more you try, the more you'll know. But it also means that there's a lot of trial and error. If you have infinite time, that's great because you can try something and then wait a little bit and then try again and then wait a little bit. And it's kind of a never-ending process. And I think that's not a bad thing. But if I can, why not shortcut the whole thing? Or why not shortcut things that I can? And there is a way to do that. I like to learn from competitors. And there are almost always apps that are similar to what your app does, whether it's an app or a game, something completely new or something that's been done a million times. There's usually something that's similar. It doesn't have to be exact, meaning the features don't have to be identical and they don't have to go after the exact same market. But they probably have something you can learn from, something you can easily say this works or this doesn't work. And so my analysis process involves this. First, what I do is I look for obvious mistakes. Then I apply best practices. Then I apply tricks. And then I make assumptions on what I think would work better. And then I use data to validate those assumptions. Now, if you're thinking, what are obvious mistakes? What are best practices? How do I know what the tricks are? I wrote about all those, and I published several guides that will take you through best practices for the app's name, for the subtitle, for the long description, for the keyword list in App Store Connect, as well as tricks for how to double the size of your keyword list from 100 characters to 200, and also what are obvious mistakes. So I can link to all of those later, but all this is information that's available to you if you head on into our ASO guide section. Now, how I analyze competitors, and that's where it gets interesting. First, I have to figure out who the app is up against. And I say up against because your ASO competitors are not always the competitors that you would think of when you think about your features. And then I look at their performance and I try to understand what they're doing, what they're not doing, what they're trying, what they're not trying. I analyze gaps in keywords, meaning areas where I rank and they don't, or they rank and I don't. And then I use all of this information to try and compile a list of keywords that I want to attack. So the tools I use to do all of this, and if you've been using our ASO tools, you've probably come across all of these. They're really useful. And if you haven't, you should. We have a free trial. The first and the one I like the most, and probably the one you'll see the most in this webinar, is Keyword Inspector. You put in a keyword, and it scans the App Store, Google Play, and the country for the results. And then it also shows you additional information, which is a little bit more than what you would see, a lot more than what you would see if you look at the App Store. And it's relevant information to understand, can I rank for this keyword? Should I even try? And if not, what are some of the alternatives that I can look into? I'm also going to use App Intelligence, which is the competitors report. So I can see what kind of downloads and what kind of revenues and what are the trends for those competitors. So I get an idea of if I even want to compete with them. And then I'm going to make things very easy by using the competitors keywords report, where I can input competitors and see all the keywords they're using and do that gap analysis that I mentioned before. That's pretty much it. Less showing for me, more doing for me. So I'm going to share my screen first. This is the keyword inspector, and that's what I'm going to use to begin pretty much everything that I do. And again, if you have any questions or anything like that, drop that in the Q&A or in the chat. So the first app that I picked is called Sunbasket. I was not familiar with Sunbasket before. I did a little bit of research based on what I saw here, and I think I'm familiar with similar apps in general. And so that was very interesting. It's an app that seems to be addressing a pretty common need at this point. It's rated pretty well, but I didn't even know that it existed. And I thought that, we can improve upon that. So this is the first app we're going to analyze today. And the first thing that I see, if you remember best practices from the checklist, is Sunbasket does not have any keywords in its name. Not even keywords in a sense that it's trying to influence the algorithm, keywords in a sense that to give me an idea of what's going on. So what is Sunbasket? Farm fresh meals delivered, sure, but I don't know, it's gray, it's smaller. People read that a lot less often than they read the name. So I would actually say this is mistake number one that we see in this app. And this, by saying mistake, I don't mean this is bad. I mean this is an area for really easy improvement. Putting some sort of a keyword into the app's name, and the name is by far the most important thing that Apple looks at specifically, will allow this app, Sunbasket, to rise in ranks. I would say pretty much immediately. Now, how do I know that it's going to happen immediately? Is I look at these ratings, and these ratings here, 4.6 thousand ratings, 4.5 average. They're telling me it's a healthy app. Things are moving, and when an app has healthy ratings, and soon enough we'll look at downloads, we'll see that that's probably the same. Any changes to ASO happen really, really quickly. Even for apps that don't have that many downloads or that many ratings, changes happen quickly because the algorithm always wants to float interesting things, and it tries. It means that there's going to be some fluctuation when you make initial keyword changes, but that's not a bad thing. Whether you stick or not, that's going to be really determined by ratings, by downloads, and by how many people actually click through and download the app. So looking at this, the first thing I see is missing keywords in the name. Next up, I'm pretty sure this subtitle is not extremely optimized for ASO. I mean, I can see that someone thought about it, and it does make sense for humans, but we'll take a look and see if meals delivered or fresh meals or farm fresh meals is actually something people are looking for. I have a feeling people might be looking for something slightly bit different, like meal delivery or something like that. But that's a good, at least, we're heading in the right direction. The other thing that I see here is the screenshots. And if you have followed anything that I've done before, you know that when it comes to screenshots, I get very critical. So let's take a quick look at these screenshots. And I think they're actually pretty good. So one good thing that I see is social proof, rated #1. Of course, I want to download the #1 app. Why not? So that's a great positive. I also like the contrast that I see here. So there is enough contrast that I can read here. Very easy to read how to customize my protein, which sounds like a very specific caption. Hopefully this was tested. But fresh recipes every week, that is very actionable. I like recipes. I want to get them every week. Why not? This is showing me that there's enough variety, and this is showing me that I can customize stuff. I'm not entirely sure what this is, but I have a feeling that if I think about it for more than 10 seconds, I probably will understand what's going on. So overall, these are actually pretty new. One thing that you don't see often is you don't see tilted tilted UI. Usually the UI will just be dead center and will be very straight. I kind of like it. It adds a little bit of a pizzazz to it. And the colors here are very, very eye-catching. I would say this is well done. If they can take the same mindset and apply it to the name of the app with keywords, I think they'll be doing pretty well. Hopefully someone from Sunbasket is on here and is listening to this. So let's take a look at keywords. Let's have some fun. Ooh, I see something in the chat. Oh, hey, Dan. Oof, that is not pretty. I'm sorry about that. I'm learning about this new webinar platform. So if I mess up again, I'm sorry. But let's start with keyword analysis. So Sunbasket is saying farm fresh, meals delivered. So the algorithm is seeing meals delivered, fresh, farm, and Sunbasket. Sunbasket is a brand name, so I'm going to skip that because we want to find people who don't know about the brand, who are potentially trying to find meal delivery apps. Now, I have done more than once an analysis of meal delivery, and the competition here is pretty fierce because we're competing with quite a few other apps, like DoorDash. But most of them use food. And I've looked at Blue Apron before and Freshly before, even in content that I've written, and even HelloFresh. So there's enough going on, and that's why the competitiveness score is 92. Competitiveness score is a score between 1 to 100, and we calculate it off of our own algorithm that looks at who's ranking for this specific keyword. So we looked at top 10 apps, and we analyzed pretty much all the information that you see in front of you. And that's why I like looking at Inspector so much, because you see everything that's relevant pretty quickly. So we can see that Freshly is #1 for food delivery, not meal delivery. We can see Blue Apron is on here, and look at the difference in downloads. If you had asked me if Freshly is more popular than Blue Apron, I would say no, because most of the people I know use Blue Apron more so than Freshly. So that's interesting. But then again, you have DoorDash with food delivery here, and how are they #3? We'll take a look at that in a minute. And so you have all these results. They're pretty interesting. You can get an idea for what's going on with downloads. So Freshly is #1 with only 35,000 downloads and not even that many ratings, but it beats DoorDash. If you were to ask me, and I think you are, this is because DoorDash doesn't use the word meals or meal in its keyword list in App Store Connect, and Freshly does. So they get delivery because they got so many downloads and so many ratings, and they're #1 in food and drink, but they don't rank well for meal because they don't optimize for it. Is that a mistake for DoorDash? Maybe, but that's for a different app teardown. So now here's a question. Where is our app? Where's Sunbasket? Let's look for it. Not here. Continuing. I mean, not that any user would actually go through 45 results to find Sunbasket, but here's the problem. They're not here at all. Now, they do have meal delivery in the app's name. Oh, no, they don't. They have meals delivered, and that's why. So small tweak, get rid of the ED, replace it with a Y. And I think that's #1 something. #2, because we already said put keywords in the name. Very easy to rank at that point. Now, let's take another look and see what these 5 apps look like. So I'm going to skip from here directly into the app intelligence portion of this, so I can do a quick analysis just to get an idea of what that looks like. We looked at downloads, but let's look at trends. So obviously DoorDash is #1 and it's beating everyone else. I wouldn't exactly call it a competitor, so I'm going to get rid of it. It's just skewing all my other numbers and making it hard to look. But now we have a pretty interesting idea of what's going on. So HelloFresh is crushing it in this particular set of competitors, followed by Everyone else, pretty much. Now, look at this. The last app here on the bottom, Snap Kitchen, is only getting 50 downloads a day, 60 downloads a day, 40 downloads a day, 28 downloads a day. So competing with it should not be difficult. And I think if the keywords were to be changed, we'd probably see improvements almost within a few hours. So I highly recommend giving that a try. Now, in general, everything you do, you should think about as an experiment, meaning be ready to undo it if it doesn't work or to do more of it if it does. I would never make a change and say, that's it, I'm done, I'm sure. So if you think about it that way, a little bit of a change here can actually change this drastically. It's very interesting. So let's take a look at meals delivered. Go back to optimization. And meals delivered. Now, everything that's happening is happening in real time, which means that an inspector is now going out to the App Store in the US on an iPhone and looking for all the results, calculating competitiveness, looking for the entire list, and also getting a popularity score. Popularity score is another metric that's from 1 essentially to 100, but you'll more likely see 5. And that gives us an idea of how many people are actually searching for this in a given month. It's not the actual number of people, so 5 is not 5 people looking for meals delivered, but it's a normalized number, meaning 100 is the most searched keyword, which I think happens to be Amazon and Instagram, and everything else cascades from there. So 5 means that someone searched for it, maybe, but that's pretty much it. So if you see a 5, you want to run away really as fast as you can. If you stick around with 5 keywords with popularity of 5, you're not going to really get a lot of downloads. And we can see this here. So 5 is a pretty easy keyword to target, and yet the #1 app does not, we don't even have estimates for it, which means that the downloads are so low, we don't even see them in a way that's accurate enough for us to show this here. Now, these are estimates that are based on our own machine learning, and we have a pretty high bar for accuracy. And so when we dip below a certain number of downloads, and we saw before that one of those apps had just tens of downloads a day, when we dip below that to usually single digits or something like that, we won't produce an estimate because it's so easy to get it wrong, and we would much rather not. But if you don't see an estimate, it probably means that there aren't enough downloads to care. And so in this case, we see Sunbasket with roughly 6,000 estimated downloads, not making it to #1, not even making it to #4, not even making it any here. And I think that's because when the keywords are not in the name, it's very difficult to gain traction versus apps that do have keywords in the name, even if they don't have the downloads or the ratings. I mean, look at this, 12, 4,000. So really minor tweaks with the name, and you should be able to see improvement. But I would not recommend trying to improve for a keyword with popularity of 5. So instead of meals delivered, we can go for, let's say, meals delivery. I have a feeling that's also going to be a 5 because meals delivery is not something I would look for. But I mean, look at who's commanding this list. This is pretty not foreign, pretty common. So meal and meals delivery are kind of the same. Now, if you're optimizing, you should use the singular version of the word, form of the word, because S takes an additional character and you're limited in number of characters, and the algorithm doesn't really care. So the algorithm will automatically pluralize every word that you have. That's just how full text search indexes work. And so you're getting really kind of free keywords if you think about it, or free characters. And as we wait for this to all happen, again, in real time, it's the same idea that we've been looking at here is pretty consistent. I'm going to skip this because we get the idea. And I want to go into the competitor keywords report. So here what I'm doing is I'm pinning the top 5 from before. And I selected the top 5 really arbitrarily. You can do this for the top 10. You can do it for the top 3. It's really up to you. This is just very convenient. And the top 5 are usually the ones that get most of the views. users don't scroll more than 5. In some cases, not even. Especially now that there's search ads on pretty much every keyword, you end up with a +1 on each one of them. So 5 is just a safe-ish bet. So here what we're seeing all the keywords that we found: Freshly, Blue Apron, Snap Kitchen, HelloFresh, and this app, Wegmans Meals, in the App Store in the US when searched from an iPhone. And we can see we have quite a few keywords, 500 plus. Now 500 plus is really a lot to analyze. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig in even deeper so I can enable a few filters. And now that we have the full report, and here I can add more, I can remove, I'm going to do a few things. So one, I'm going to look for only keywords where the apps, at least one of the apps, is ranked in the top 10. And then I'm going to draw a popularity of 5 because I said runaway quick and I meant it. So we'll go 10 to 100, and we won't worry about competitiveness for now. And now it's a much more manageable list of just 20 keywords. And that's pretty easy. So here's how we do it. First, we'll look at what Freshly is ranking in. Meal delivery, we saw that. We had an idea. Meal kit, low popularity, but not too far. And then a bunch of competitor names. Home Chef, I wonder if that's an app name. And then from here, you can get some ideas. They're not ranking for some of these things like cookbook, meal plans, which could potentially be interesting. Then we do the same thing for Blue Apron. And Blue Apron is also in the running for meal delivery, number 2. So we can see what that's like. And we can get other ideas. So meal kit, for example, seems to be a good idea. I'm not 100% familiar with Sunbasket, so maybe meal kit does not make any sense at that point. But if it does, this could be a really good keyword. Now, I really like the idea of meal delivery, and it's super simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for related keywords. And related keywords is back to Keyword Inspector, my favorite tool. And what it does is it uses our own machine learning on top of all the keywords that we see in the App Store and everything pretty much. And we create relationships between different apps and different groups based on competitiveness and popularity, and also the keywords. And we aim to find keywords that could be related to meal delivery to give you ideas. So obviously, we'll find a lot of branded names, Uber Eats, DoorDash, because they all use this. But we can do a little bit more to try and filter that again. So we're going to go a bit more than 5. We'll try to keep it low so we don't get too many branded terms. And now we have some ideas. Foods, I did not think to optimize for that. Menus, plated. There's a bunch of interesting stuff. And you can dig into each one of these. Food pickup. Obviously, food pickup doesn't really fit here, but maybe that will have interesting terms associated with it, and we can continue from there. So if you find a term that you like, you can continue finding more related stuff. And the more you do this research, the more you'll come up with good terms. Now, it's not as easy to just say, give me all the terms that have the highest popularity and lowest competitiveness, which is what you want to aim for. So you really have to do these iterations. Iterations are good. They're not a bad thing. Just keep at it. That's usually how I look at it. And that's at a very high level, what I would do for Sunbasket. So hopefully, if you take any of this advice, and hopefully it'll work for you, because I can totally see how putting more keywords in the name, optimizing this a tiny bit, and hopefully also taking those lessons and applying them to the keyword list in App Store Connect. I think with all those together, you can see results almost immediately. And if you do, please let me know. I would love to hear it. So that was the first one. Next one is, I want to try and read my chat. I think that's going to be problematic. Well, let's give it a try. I may have to end my screen share for a quick second. If I do, I'll be back. Yes. Oh, wow. This is really bad. Okay. So just me for now. I see a few questions. So Dan, hopefully I did not hold back. So that should be useful. Kushal is asking, where can we see all this data analysis? You can see all this in the optimization section of your Appfigures account. And then let's let me take a quick look at questions. Chris is asking, am I understanding correctly that the App Store indexing algorithm will automatically handle plural singular, but not something more complicated like delivery versus delivered? The answer is absolutely. So the algorithm will pluralize every word that you have in a singular form, and it's going to do the other way around, but that's wasteful, so I would not recommend doing it. But it's not going to know anything about something like delivery versus delivered because it doesn't really know the meaning of most words. It knows the meaning of some words that are being that were taught. And so I would not necessarily rely on it understanding what you're trying to say, and I would be as verbose as I can with it. But plural and singular are not something you should worry about. I have a guide where I go through, I believe, 7 different things that you can do, and the algorithm will basically have your back, and we can link to that too. So pluralizing and plural and singular are one of those 7 things. I think it's 7 at least. There might be a few more. For Yannick, I would love to. I already picked the 2 apps that I will look at, but come back again. We do this every month, so I can take a look, and hopefully I'll pick it at random. So let's go back to the next app. The next app on my list is called Color Defense. Let me share my screen again. So I picked this at random, but I'm really glad that this one got picked. I don't really get to do a lot of Google Play. I believe the last few were mostly App Store focused. And while a lot of the tips are fairly similar, learning from competitors, applying best practices, looking for obvious mistakes, all those really carry over. And for the most part, they're also almost identical. The mistakes that you would see in Google Play are very similar to the mistakes that you would see on the Apple App Store. But there are a few differences. So for example, you don't see a subtitle here because Google doesn't have a subtitle. They have a short description, which they don't show in the web version of Google Play. I wish they did. Maybe I should write a plugin to make that visible because it is in the page. But they also put a lot of emphasis on the long description. And that's something that is very foreign if you're coming from the App Store to Google Play. Because for Apple, you just give them a list of keywords and hope for good. Google does not allow you to do that because Google knows how to do search. And so you need to understand how to use the long description, this whole thing, to teach and help the algorithm, the Google algorithm in this case, understand what your app is about. And I love doing it in the context of a game. So let's take a quick look at what's happening with Color Defense. Now, the first thing I see here is I see that keywords are being used in the name, which is great. Fun fact is that Google Play gives you more characters for the name and also for the short description, but that's changing. Google Play is going to change rules. I'm not exactly sure when, but very soon. And they're shortening the number of characters that you can use for the name. And they're also bringing some of the rules that Apple is using for what you can and can't do with the name. For example, the word free or the word app, and they're applying them here. I'll do a whole thing on that when it happens. But for now, something to keep in mind. So what I see here immediately, I see Color Defense, which I imagine is a tower defense game. I see the same keyword used twice, which is kind of wasteful. It might fit because tower-based defense TD, I'm not entirely sure what all that means. I mean, I do, but I don't know how this all fits for ASO, but it does look like these were carefully chosen and they're not just a guess. Or it would have been much worse to see just Color Defense. So this is a good first step. I also see a nice number of ratings, and I also see a higher than average, which is good. So let's look at the screenshots. Now you'll notice that Google does screenshots a little bit different. I shouldn't say better than Apple, but in addition to screenshots being different, and this is the web view, which is different than the mobile view, which is what you want to optimize for. You'll see more often videos on Google, and you will not see videos on the App Store. There are a whole bunch of reasons for why, and I think it's because Apple is extremely particular about what a video could be like and what it should show, and how it shouldn't be a marketing video, and it should really be more about the app and showing the app in action, which I think is not necessarily the best use of video for the App Store. But it's very discouraging. And many of the developers that I talk to, and I asked, why don't you have a video? It makes so much sense. They said, because we know we're going to get rejected for it, and we don't have the time to spend on it, and making videos is not really straightforward and cheap. So instead, they just don't. But we do see a video here because it's Google Play, and I really like it. Let's take a quick look at it. Hopefully it's appropriate. Okay. Not bad.
Wait.
That's pretty cool. So it started by asking a question, engaging, and continued to show the app in action. I like it. I think there's always something that you can do. For example, the very flat background can be a little bit more engaging and exciting, especially when we have a game that's all about colors. It's got color in its name. Use those colors, but this is a good first step. The one thing that I don't see here, and I would love to see a little bit more, and this is very common to games, is there's no explanatory text. There are no labels. There are no captions on any of these. And for apps, maybe it makes more sense to have a caption because you need to explain what it does. But the same thing goes for a game when you think about it, really. You're not trying to sell maybe a specific feature, but you're trying to sell an experience. And the experience may connect on a more emotional level because you don't want to get something done. You want to have fun, or you want to enjoy the next 5 minutes, but it's still, you need to connect and you need to engage. So just showing me that there are a few lines and red lines and, some blue things and green things and some stuff on the screen, that's cool and all, but I have no idea what that means. So my eyes gloss over it and they say, okay, next. And then here I see something else going on. What is this? Stuff is happening on the screen, right? And here something else is happening on the screen, and here something else is happening on the screen. And here's just a lot of words that I'm not going to read because I don't have time to do any of this. And then the more you continue, the more you realize that why have screenshots if screenshots on their own don't really tell a story. So this is the mistake I see with this app, and something that I would highly recommend fixing or at least improving is tell me a story, right? So share something that I can actually use to understand what's going on. What am I looking at? And what can I do with it? And so if you do that, these screenshots will become useful. I think until you do, they're not really that useful because if I don't know what a tower defense game is, this is not going to help me understand what it is. And if I do know, I'm not going to care about this. This is just one implementation way of implementing tower defense. And I've seen so many that either I will download it because I'm curious, or I'll just skip over to something else that really engages me and captures my attention. So that would be my advice here. I have a whole guide on how to do screenshots, and it goes into captions and what's the best way to do them and what's the right tone. But I also did an AF chat with, I forgot the name of the guy, but he had some very helpful tips about doing screenshots specifically for games. And he even went into what the difference is between games and apps when it comes to screenshots and the language and the kind of emotion you want to evoke. And I thought that was really well said. So I can link to that video as well if anyone wants to see it. It's like a 2-minute video clip that we got from the hour-long video. Really worth a watch. So we can start with that. Now, there's a quick question. Jeff is asking, do you need to upload a new bundle version for any App Store ASO tweak versus Google Play where you don't? And the answer is yes. Apple doesn't really let you change anything but the promotional text, which is completely useless for App Store optimization. So you have to upload a bundle. In most cases, I say when you test different things, whether it's a screenshot or a keyword, a set of keywords, or any other metadata like keywords in the keyword list, you probably want to do it about once a month, or not more than once a month, because results start to get really blurry at that point. And I know from most of the developers I talk to, including from our app, there's usually something you want to push once a month or once every couple months or a month and a half. So if you just couple those with those changes, you'll probably be fine. It's not ideal, obviously, but it's what you have to do. And let's continue then into Inspector. So I'm going to look now a little bit more at tower defense games and then specifically at color defense. And we're going to do all of this through Google Play. Again, using Inspector because we can switch that. Let me switch my tab to Keyword Inspector. So I think I have to do this. And then I have to do this. learning in real time. So we're still on food pickup. Let's undo this. So we'll look for tower defense. And we're going to switch to Google Play, and we're still in the US in this case. I'm going to switch away from related keywords. I should have just refreshed the page to reset it all, but I didn't. So here again, a whole bunch of interesting stuff that I see right in front of me. So one, fairly popular, also extremely competitive. That's what you would expect to see from something like this, because tower defense is probably one of the more common games on mobile, or at least it was when the iPhone and Android first started, in my recollection. And so you see a whole bunch of games that are targeting this specific keyword, which is great to see because it means that users are probably looking for those keywords, and the popularity score kind of agrees with us. So we see that Kingdom Rush is #1, and I believe a few live app teardowns ago, Kingdom Rush also was the #1 result for something else. So it's definitely all over the place. And then you can see that download-wise, it doesn't take a lot to get into the top. 8,000 downloads is probably not that many. And if you do your keywords right, you're probably better off. And so downloads are not the only thing that really matters. We can look at the number of ratings. They're kind of high, but it's still possible. Now, I'm interested to see what would happen if we do this. So this would never work on Apple, but on Google Play, it might. Apple doesn't really like when you have app or a game in your keywords. And for some reason, everything is slow because it's real time, and that's what happens in real time. But we can at least see some icons. So again, Kingdom Rush is #1, and I think that's going to be common for a lot of what we see that has to do with tower defense. I'm going to leave this alone for now. Oh, there we go. So pretty much the same results as before. So we can see that's very similar. Now, let's do this. Let's take these top results and give them a quick comparison. Well, everything got slow all of a sudden. Might be a good time to take some questions. We're just asking about arcade apps or arcade games on Apple. So arcade is actually not something I've looked at too much yet. And for the most part, that's because arcade, even though it's kind of intertwined with the same search results, it really isn't. They have their own way of doing things, and it's a little bit foreign to ASO in general. You also don't really have that many arcade games yet. Apple just pushed, I think, probably one of the biggest updates to arcade games, what was it, last month? And so now it's starting to get really, really cool. But I've been on arcade since arcade started, and I gotta be honest, the games don't excite me as much. I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know if it's because Apple is, putting their their own Apple touch on most of those, or if it's because something about games with little limitation makes it less fun. But for now, I don't touch it enough, and that's why I don't really have a lot of insight or data analysis yet. But I will in the future, because I think that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I see the demand from our members. So eventually we'll have something to contribute on that front. And we have some data. So if we're looking at all these apps together, we can see number of downloads as before, and they're all free, so that's easy. But we can also see the trends. So unlike what we're looking at before, these trends are pretty similar, pretty similar. And that's something that's important to keep in mind, because you need to know where you're going to fit inside of these. And these numbers are actually not that high. So in theory, it shouldn't be too difficult to get into it. We can look at the distribution by country. Let's take a look at the keywords as we did before. And this is me going off of really the most competitive keyword here. So in theory, it should give us the most ideas, but they might be hard to approach if we don't have the right downloads. But we'll start with that because I think that's a good starting point. Always start big and then go down from there. I'm not sure why things have slowed down so much all of a sudden. Well, even an error. Let's see what's up. Let's refresh this page and hope for good. We got some icons, so we're already on our path to greatness. And that's the fun of doing everything in real time and live and not pre-recorded, is you get to wait a lot. Not a lot, just when it decides. If you have any questions, now is a really good time to ask them as we wait for this. So Noel is asking, if you have a niche app with a small audience number of downloads, will we be able to benefit from the analytics on your platform, or will the small download numbers not register? Absolutely. So what we're looking at, here again, we'll give that a second. So going back to an app with a small number of downloads, we have multiple areas to our platform. The small number of downloads for you, we'll still aggregate them and show them to you all in one place. So it's going to be really convenient to follow what's happening with your app. Ideally, you'd like to grow that app, or you'd like to grow those downloads. So you want to track more, and you want to follow your competitors. If your competitors also have just a few downloads, maybe you got to find new competitors, or maybe you got to look at slightly larger apps to get ideas. But whatever it is that you do, you'll always find an app that is informative enough to help you understand your strategy better or formulate your strategy better. So I would say there's always something to learn if you know where to look. And we have all the tools for you to see that. We're going to give this another refresh and hope for good. If not, we'll open a support ticket and just take questions for the rest of this webinar. A question from Andrew is, where do you get your download data? We actually manufacture our download data. So this is all estimated, and we look at a few inputs from the store itself. So we look at an app's rank, we look at its rating, we look at a whole bunch of other things, like which SDKs are installed, and all the things that we can to get a better idea of what downloads are like. We do that in a way that makes sense. We don't take any data from devices or from people. None of this is identifiable. We don't do any of that. And yeah, Apple definitely doesn't do any of this, nor does Google. Google gives you a slight, like a bucket of numbers, and it's an all-time number, and it's not a trend, and it's not very useful. But there's so much use in understanding those patterns and those trends that if you can't look at that, you're really just making decisions blindly. You're hoping that your decision makes sense. You don't know that it's going to work out. And when it's your time, or it's your money on advertising, or it's really your money on anything, the last thing you want to do is you want to guess. And that's why they're so incredibly important. And that's why we work so hard to manufacture these estimates. And we also put a lot of time into making sure that they're as accurate as possible. They're obviously estimates, so accuracy is only as good as our models. But we work very hard for those models to get as close as possible to reality. And in the case where we can't, and there are many cases where we can't, if we don't have a strong enough model and we know that it's not going to be good enough, we actually don't expose any of that data. So the data on the platform is either great or not there at all. And that's how we feel good about sharing this data. Hopefully that answers the question. Another question from Umit, who's asking, is it a good idea to insert and iterate the most strong keywords in title, subtitle, promo text, and description too? If I'm understanding this correctly, it's absolutely a great idea. It's not even a great idea. It's like how you do it. So you want to start with the app's name. The app's name is what matters the most to the algorithm. And even within the app's name, it's the keywords in the beginning. So you have 30 characters for Apple, and you want to put them as close up front as possible. And then comes the subtitle, and then comes the keyword list. The promo text doesn't actually do anything for Apple, and the description doesn't either. I also have a guide that explains how to take advantage of all of those together and combine them in a way that makes sense. But the gist is that you want to have your most important keywords in the app's name and subtitle, and what I call extensions and modifiers in the keyword list, because they all get combined eventually by the App Store algorithm. So instead of seeing them as 3 separate strings of words, of characters, they eventually become one string, which with less and more emphasis, depends on where they're placed. And there's another question from Rouge, who's asking, is it safe to assume that no one is generally looking after ASO in that category? I've been looking for months, and most of the people avoid my question. Following general ASO practices, be a good choice for the time being. And that category means arcade. So I believe that the best practices are going to be the same, because why would Apple have a different algorithm for ranking arcade apps than not? I think it's more of a headache. It's more of a kind of a pain to maintain. And so I would generally imagine that the same rules apply. Again, the selection is much smaller. And so you probably have more luxury and more flexibility. But the basics, the basics are all the same. So you want to keep keywords in the app's name. You want to keep slightly less important keywords in the app's subtitle, and then everything else, the extensions, the modifiers, and everything else that makes sense, right in the keyword list. And the more you ask about this, the more I just want to do a teardown now of an arcade app, which is probably what I'm going to do next or soon, because this is pretty exciting. And let's see, any more questions? No, that's it for now. Okay, so data has loaded. Ooh, a question from Rouge now on chat. We're talking in like all tabs. What would you say about keywords versus branding? I think it's complicated. I'll get to it in a second though, because I have a feeling that we'll dip into this here. And we're slowly running out of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly, but luckily we're at the end. And the same principles that I went through before really apply here as well. So, and this ties into the question. We see a lot of brands being mentioned here. And tower defense, actually, here, cool. Army games, okay, that I didn't really think about. Strategy games, that makes sense. I want to dip into the full report so we can do some filtering. My thoughts on branding versus keyword is it really depends on your company and on your app. If you have a brand that's very strong, and in some cases, when you look at keyword popularity, like for example, Tinder and Bumble, the name Tinder is more popular than dating on the App Store, which kind of makes sense given everything we know about the industry. But that's not the case for all the apps, and that's probably an extreme case. And so if you're Tinder, to put, let's say, dating by Tinder would be a mistake because you're taking the less popular keyword and you're putting it up front. So they would do Tinder-dating, let's just say, if that was the case. But if you're in a place where one, your brand is not well known at all, so let's say you have a smart remote, you probably want to start with smart remote by and then your company name. Now, one tiny thing is that I know some app developers don't go with a brand name at all. They just throw away the brand and go with something extremely generic, thinking this would be great for App Store optimization. And I think for the most part, it is. But the real problem is that you're not just doing App Store optimization, you're also selling to people. So if, let's say I have a smart remote app and I don't have a company name in my app's name, if someone is downloading my app and they love it so much because I spent all that time making it awesome, and they want to tell their friends, they're just going to tell their friends to go and download smart remote. And the friend is going to type smart remote into their search box. And really whatever has smart remote in it, they're going to take because they have an idea which one to pick. And then you lose out on the viral aspect of your app. And it's really inconvenient for me, for anyone, for any of the users to share the name of your app, and you're really giving traffic away to the competitors. So all those are negative, and I don't really see a big positive, and I would say don't do it. So let's continue looking at this quick, and then I'll get back to some questions. So here, same thing. We're gonna look at the ranks, and here we have quite a bit interesting things. Tower defense, again, number one, which makes sense. And if you look at it, all these other apps are not really looking all that great. And then the more we go, the more we see some more ideas. Tower defense games, tower games, Kingdom. I guess that makes sense because that's the brand name. Let's do some filtering. We're going to take 1 through 10. We're going to just a little bit more than, let's go for double digits. Okay, cool. That gives us a whole bunch of different ideas. Castle defense. You know, I would not actually think of searching for Castle defense, but it might be the name of another game that I just haven't played. Strategy games. That's actually, so that's a good point here to make. And that is, with apps, you want to be as specific as possible. So if you have a feature, highlight it. With games, you can be a little bit more generic. So strategy games might be very difficult on 94, but at the same time, it's pretty popular. So if you want to do something along the lines of color defense, something, tower defense, strategy game, or strategy with tower defense, I don't know. I got to spend more time thinking about the phrasing. But if you can bring those two together, you're really knocking out two things at once. You're getting the tower defense in there, you're getting the defense in there in general, and you're also getting the strategy, which will capture a few more people than I think you might with something as specific as tower defense. Now, obviously, that's not necessarily true because this is less popular than this. But these change all the time. It's possible just, this week, less people have searched for strategy games and more people are searching for tower defense. So they're very similar, and I would not necessarily make that assumption. I would advise, even if you see all these competitor names like Bloons here, I would advise against optimizing for them, because if I'm looking for Bloons, I'm not going to download your app. If I'm looking for Kingdom Rush, I'm going to download Kingdom Rush, just because that's how it is. But this, again, gives us an idea. So just to get a quick, just take a quick gander, I'm going to look at related keywords for tower defense. And let's see what we got. RPG, okay. Tower defense games. Defense games. Okay, so we're pretty much in similar territory here. I'm going to jump to page 4. Maybe I'll find something good. So more names of games, which is pretty common, especially when we're on the Google Play side, where you have a lot more keywords to work with. But if you continue searching here, and we will continue going through related and related, you will eventually find more keywords that are useful. And again, bring them into the app's name and bring it into the short description and long description. Before I jump into keywords in the last few minutes that I have, one thing that's very important with Google Play that is not with Apple at all is the long description. And one of the challenges that you have with the long description is Google is very good at extracting meaning from a good body of text. And why? It's because they've been doing this for so long, and obviously successfully. So what you want to do is you want to follow the basics, which are repetition in your description. So take the keywords that you want to optimize most for, I would say 3 to 5 maximum keywords, and repeat them enough. There isn't really like a specifically strict rule about how many times you should have your keywords in your description. But from what I've seen and from what I know, it's if your keyword density is about 3 to 5%, probably more towards the 3 and less towards the 5, that would be pretty useful. I checked the keyword density for color defense, and keyword density is the number of occurrences of color of tower defense divided by the number of words in the long description, and it was just about 1%. I think it was 5 out of 500. And so you want to increase that a little bit. But in addition to that, Google is very good, again, at extracting meaning. So if you want them to understand the concept of tower defense, if you can think of ways to use that in slightly different words, but with the same meaning, you should sprinkle that as well. I know that's a little bit more, requires more creativity, and it's definitely much less defined, but it's actually worth it in the long run. And so you should spend time on thinking about not just how well your description is read by humans, because long bodies of text are usually not read by humans, not on small phones, unless they're reading the news, and and that's not relevant. But it's definitely read by the algorithm. And so spend time with your description and try to really get the most out of it. If you're just doing it last minute as an afterthought, that's probably going to cost you downloads. And so you don't want to do that. And if you end up doing that, make sure that you schedule time to think about it in the future and reiterate on it a few times until you have something good that has as many keywords as you can, and also with the right repetition and right density. So that's how I would do color defense. Now, back to questions. Let's see. I have quite a few and only a few minutes. So Emmanuel was asking Umid is asking, could you tell us what the best ways to bring some traffic to the app page from outside the App Store search? Maybe launching a Twitter, Facebook page, which relates to the product. That is a really long answer that I would have to give you. But luckily, I do have a guide on the things that you can do outside of the App Store for free to generate attention for your app or game. And they include a few things like going on Product Hunt and having that. And even if you don't make it to the top of Product Hunt, just having some visibility is better than no visibility. The same thing with going on Reddit and really contributing with what your app or game, what they can contribute, and doing more to just spread the word. Twitter and Facebook are definitely good places to be on. You should be on them. It's not as easy to gain traction on social media as it may seem. And so you need to go after something that already has traction and join it in the beginning. Hopefully that was what you were looking for. Emmanuel was asking, is there any benefit to adding keywords in both the subtitle plus keyword field for App Store, or is subtitle sufficient? So I have a very controversial answer that not many agree with, but for me, it works very well. And I believe that you should duplicate the most important keywords between the name subtitle and the keyword list. So not between the name and the subtitle, that should be completely unique, but between that and the keyword list. And the reason for that is, one, you have more space in the keyword list. And from what I've seen, most developers don't actually use up all 100 characters. And so there's always a little bit of space to spare. And two, it gives a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of reinforcement where you need it most. And so I wouldn't do it all the time, but I would do it on something that's extremely competitive or extremely hard to rank in. And then Andrew is asking, does the App Store use the company name as a keyword for ASO purposes? And the answer to that is absolutely. And that's why you see so many companies, so many company names that are basically a bunch of keywords, as many bunches of keywords as they could squeeze into it. You may see it a lot less now. I think Apple doesn't really love it all that much. And they do use it, but it's not really used to the max, meaning the weight that they place on the company name is very, very, very small. So if you have it, you're going to get some sort of a boost, but it's not going to be the thing that really brings you over the top, I'm pretty sure. So I would say it's really up to you. Obviously, it's a company name, and to me, a company name is something that's a little bit precious. I would want it to be something that I'm very proud of, and having a list of keywords is not something I can easily be proud of, and I think the benefit is not that amazing, so I wouldn't do it. But it's definitely done, and you can see it if you search specifically for weather apps. I see it with weather apps all the time, but in that entire niche, you'll see company names that are just a bunch of keywords. And then one more. Are keyword positions in title, subtitle important? Asked by Alberto. Absolutely. So the position in the title, meaning the name, is very important because that's how the algorithm reads from left to right, obviously. And so if you have, like the example we had before, dating by Tinder, then the algorithm would say first and most important is dating, then Tinder. And if you do it the other way around, the Tinder for dating, then Tinder would be the most important. In a lot of cases, it doesn't really make a big difference because most keywords, it's just a small boost. It's smallish, I would say, depends on the category and how many competitors and how well they're doing ASO. But what I would say is that if your brand name is not well recognized yet, put it at the end. There's really no benefit to putting it at the front. And if it's recognized, start with it because you don't want to lose that momentum. Because brand names are usually very, very unique, it's going to be very difficult for a competitor to beat you on your own keyword, on your own name, unless they start their name with it. And that's going to look really, really terrible. And I don't think Apple will easily allow that. So you shouldn't be afraid of losing out on ranks for your own brand name. But again, I would only do it if I had a brand name that was either very new or unknown yet. And then eventually I would bring it to the beginning of the name. And I think that's all the time we have. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's all the time we have. Nothing else in the chat or questions. And we're just at about an hour. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening and for being here. Hopefully I got your answers the way you wanted them. And hopefully you learned something valuable from my process and my hands-on way of learning and teaching. Good luck with your App Store optimization. And if you need any more advice, we have quite a few guides. We posted a bunch of them here, but if you head on to appfigures.com/resources, you're going to find a bunch more, as well as the news about the industry, where you can subscribe to our weekly newsletters and get these by email, or get my Friday This Week in Apps newsletter as well. Again, thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.